Can you tell it's George Clooney?
Yes, we
What?
and Amal.
Yeah.
From my point of view, this is such a weird thing to do for a birthday.
It is.
Yeah,
It's not.
that I'm going to make a few. I'm going to make a few disclaimers and introductions first.
Tell us who you are.
This may not be as easy as you thought.
You guys are much more rowdy than the last
Could get worse.
couple. I hope.
Let's go. Hello, Boston. It's nice to be back. Let's start.
I mean, I don't know what you people think of me, but you know I'm not a writer or a performer. What you maybe don't know is that I'm also extremely uncomfortable being the center of attention or doing anything public. It's not stage fright exactly. It's more like echoes from when I was a young kid and got, humiliated and ridiculed for standing out. So I kind of thought, at age 65, maybe I should try to get over that. But, there's always a possibility it'll make it worse. I don't know. I like, the Marth Radio Hour. I listen to it all the time and things like that. I like stories, and I like telling stories, actually. Though I'm too chicken to do it on the radio. But for some reason, around Christmas, I started being, not to put too fine a point on it, obsessed with this story. And I decided I would like to tell it. And I got Bonnie to tell you I was going to do it, so now I can't back out. It's at least partly about family, and you'll see my family was not traditional, but I don't know if there ever was, a lot of traditional. Families have always been very different. You know that Bonnie and I have 2 adopted daughters. Anna's from Guatemala, Luis is from El Salvador. I know some of you also do, but I've been thinking that at their age, if they had stayed there, they'd probably be among the people, if they were still alive, trying to migrate north with their kids. So they've both said to us that they felt they were lucky, to live here. But from our point of view, we're lucky that they've been in our lives. And I know a number of you also have diverse families. I know Jessie's got 4 moms and met her biological dad when she was 18. I didn't meet my dad until I was 36 or 7. That's another story which I'm not going to tell right now. Let's see what else. Well, my only other disclaimer is that it's rather long and it's in several parts, and there's no intermission. So if any of you haven't gone to the bathroom, go now. Let's see, what else did I forget last time? And I feel very weird about being filmed, but actually several of our friends, including in Chile, have asked to see it, so we're doing it. Okay. Have you ever thought about why people are attracted to each other, or why you were attracted to somebody? Have you ever had, like, love at first sight? Well, part of this story is I had the experience of being attracted to somebody, and through a very odd series of events that followed, discovering what was the root of that, and it was fairly surprising. Okay? This happened in the early 70s when I was living in Cambridge, Magnolia Avenue. I think it was before you showed up. I think.
72 we got, no, 75 we got there.
Yeah, it was before you showed up. I was living in a two-bedroom apartment, and my roommate had moved out, and it was the beginning of the fall term. I was looking for a new roommate, and a woman named Susan showed up to see the place. So I showed her around, and we sat down and had tea and talked with each other. She was from the South. She'd lived in Cambridge for, I think, 4 or 5 years. I forget exactly what she was doing. She was living in a group house. It was breaking up, and she was looking for a new place to live. And after a while, as I talked, I realized that there was a problem. And I just felt overwhelmingly attracted to her. It wasn't, well, first I gotta say, it wasn't just that I was horny and I felt this way about every woman that walked in. But it wasn't, so much directly sexual. I felt very warm towards her and very attracted towards her. And after a while, I just felt, I kind of stuttered and stammered, and I said, well, look, if we're gonna be living together, I think I have to say that I'm, attracted to you. This didn't faze her at all. She said, I'm familiar with that issue. She said, in the group house that she was living in a couple of years before, to minimize drama in the house, they had made an anti-incest rule. No sleeping with people. No sleeping with their housemates. And she said that the way they had, one of the ways, she said it didn't exactly work out. She said one of the ways that they tried to enforce this is when there was turnover, if somebody really attractive showed up, no, they weren't taken. And they tended to take people who not only weren't attractive, but that were fairly repulsive.
Oh my God.
And she said that all that meant was 6 months later, one of us was sleeping with somebody we found repulsive. Anyway, you can see why I remember this conversation. I thought that was great, but she didn't end up moving in. But she moved in upstairs with another woman. And she had a boyfriend. I actually can't remember if I had a girlfriend at the time. But we became what they now call friends with benefits, which I think is, I wish we had had that concept back then, because it would have clarified a lot of relationships. And, every once in a while she would come down and spend the night in my apartment. Well, this went on during the fall, and then the fall term ended, there was winter break, and I went home. For those of you who don't know, my home was with my mother in the South Bronx, in a 4-story walk-up tenement where I'd lived all my life. And while I was home on the break, my mother died. Technically, she committed suicide. But I think of it as she died. It was the end of her life. When I thought about it later, I realized that she had told me a number of times when I was younger the story about the Eskimos who at the end of their life, go out and walk into the snow and die. I think that's probably not true, but it reflects her attitude towards how she wanted to be in control of the end of her life. She was a strong person, but not strong in the way that you can go out and make things happen in the world. She was strong in the sense that she was independent and as they say now, she persisted, right? I am going to tell you about her death, but first I'm going to tell you about her life. And kind of for two reasons. One is, hey, it's my birthday, and she's responsible for that. And the other is, she's the kind of invisible woman who, you know, doesn't get an obituary, theoretically doesn't do anything significant in her life, but, you know, deserves to be remembered. Her name was Gertrude Maria Holmstrom. You'll notice we have the same last name. That'll come up a little bit later, but I'll give you a preview hint. My best friend's mother in high school said to him one time, well, with a name like that and a nose like that, it was obvious what happened. People called her Gertie, not Trudy. She had a slight case of polio. She was the youngest of 7. Okay, and it was, you know, very poor family, lived on 135th Street in the South Bronx. She was born about 10 blocks from where she died. She had a slight case of polio when she was young, which left the side of her face paralyzed and deaf in one ear. It was not, and you know, her eye drooped a little bit. I didn't think it was very noticeable, but she was sensitive about it. And almost all the pictures I have of her, she's turned her head that way. She dropped out of high school to go to work. I'm not exactly sure when, but it might have been right at the beginning of the Depression, to help support the family. She worked in a kitchen, actually, at Metropolitan Life on 23rd Street. At some point after that, she met my father. And he was the only man that she had a relationship with in her life. So this was in the 1930s. Sometime after a couple of years, whoop, here we go. Yeah, you're here for the good part. You know, so, after a couple of years, she got, well, two things I want to say. First of all, he was Jewish, and of course she wasn't. And he hid this from his family. They never knew about her. She got pregnant, and for whatever reason, he forced her to have an abortion. I'm not sure, they got married sometime after that, and I'm not sure if that was like part of the deal. But, you know, there's some things I'm never going to know. During the war, they traveled around working different places. My mother worked in the Springfield Armory for a while. And they ended up in Cambridge. They lived on Inman Street. This was partly because his parents, his father was a druggist, and they had a drugstore first in Harlem, but they moved up here, and they lived on Winchester Street, and they had a drugstore on Harvard Street here. Not exactly sure where. I think it's where the hardware store is now. But again, they didn't know about my mother. And she got pregnant again, and he wanted her to have another abortion. And she didn't, and he left. So she chose her baby over her husband. In other words, she chose me. So it's my birthday, right?
Smart choice. Smart choice.
Yeah, well, actually, after I met him, definitely.
Yeah.
So she waited around to see if he would come back. And he didn't. And she took me to the drugstore. And showed me to his mother and said, "This is your grandson." Then she moved back to New York. And we were homeless for about 3 years. Not living on the street, but living in other people's houses, mainly her brother's. We ended up in the house on 148th Street, where her brother and his family lived, and they moved out to Long Island. We inherited the apartment and just lived there forever. Thank God for rent control. They left us a bed, and we had a little table that was like a little kid's table. And I remember my mother went out and got some orange crates that we used as chairs. Over a while, I don't know how she did it, but she managed to get some furniture. And we were on welfare. And she tried to work, but I was sick a lot as a kid, and they tried putting me in daycare and it didn't work. So one way or another, she couldn't work. So as I say, we were on welfare. And I went to school, and we were the family in the school that got the paper bag with the food in it at Thanksgiving and so on. And one of the things that was really wonderful about my mother is she was never ashamed of any of this. She thought that that's how people ought to be treated, She didn't feel like it was begging. Anyway, I was a little more healthy by the time I was 10 or 11, and she went to work. She got a job. And then a year or two later, she took a civil service exam and got a low-level clerk's job with the city, and she worked for the city for the rest of her life. When I was in high school, she went back and got a GED and took another civil service exam and became a senior clerk. Something else happened during the time I was in high school. I was maybe 13 or 14. And this relates to her death, so I'm going to tell it. One night I got up and she had been not feeling well, but one night I got up and she was delirious and soaked in sweat. She had taken all her clothes off and was wrapped in a sheet, and it was soaked in sweat. She was delirious. And I didn't know what to do. And we didn't have a phone. So I went downstairs to one of the neighbors, and they called, and an ambulance came. And the ambulance attendants were really pissed because she didn't have any clothes on. They made me put a nightgown on her. And then they carried her downstairs, and they took her to Lincoln Hospital. And we were there this is the middle of the night, right? We were there for an hour or two, and they sent her home. And they wouldn't give us an ambulance to go home. And she couldn't walk. So we took a cab. That was the first time I was ever in a cab. May have been the first time she was ever in a cab. We got home, it was, maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, and she couldn't walk. One of the neighbors came down, and I went upstairs and I got a kitchen chair. And we put her in the chair, and the cab driver and my neighbor carried her up the 4 flights. And she was incontinent. She was pissing and shitting the whole time. So when we got upstairs, I kind of cleaned her up as best I could. And I got her into bed. think people who know me know this. You just do what you have to do. So the next morning, one of her brothers, I don't remember all the details here, but he had lived in the neighborhood and he knew a doctor, and he got her into a Catholic hospital. She was in there for 6 weeks. I don't know if they ever really figured out what was wrong with her, or at least I never knew. But they said that it was Lincoln Hospital's practice to discharge people that they thought were going to die because they didn't want it on their records. Anyway, for a little break here, let me just say that she did go back to work, and the work she did, she worked for the buildings department in the Bronx, and her desk was unsafe buildings. I mean, we had at least one Bronx person here, right? In the 50s, unsafe buildings was like if there was a fire and the city had to have it demolished. In the 50s, there might be one a week or two a week, and we loved the Bronx. We would go and look at it. By the late 60s, there was so many that she couldn't keep up with it. There was all of this. So she was kind of witness to all of that. And of course, as maybe they tried to blame this on the tenants, and it turned out to be mostly arson for profit, like here in Boston too. Anyway, so getting back to 72 or 73, whatever it was, when I got back to the Bronx, she was sick. And not sick, but she had a lot of pain in her back, and she didn't know what it was, and she just had trouble getting up and down the stairs. She really didn't want to go to the doctors. But I bugged her and I convinced her. And she was covered by the city plan at this point, the HIP plan, and the city had its own little hospital up in the Bronx. And I took her up there to see the doctor, and they said, well, we can't tell. We need to do tests. We have to put her in the hospital. She really didn't want to, but I put her in the hospital. And I don't think they ever really figured out what was going on, but she was miserable, and she begged me to take her home. And after 4 or 5 days I took her home. And I went back up to talk to her doctor. And I'm not sure I can convey this fully, but I was a Harvard graduate student at the time. And I was surrounded by all of these entitled people. And I actually said to myself, if I act entitled, we'll get treated better. Mm-hmm. It didn't work. I mean, I just felt so powerless. Doctor said, I'm not going to treat her anymore. She's an uncooperative patient. We never did manage to get her another doctor. Hi, guys. Come on. You know what?
I'll just disrupt everything.
Yeah, we already did. But actually, I'm going to interrupt this because this actually made me think of something that I forgot that I was going to say. As I said, my mother never had another relationship with a man. But sometime when I was 8 or 9 years old, she had a very close friend named Grace. We used to go visit her. And Grace had these toys that I would play with, and they would hang out. At some point, Grace suggested that we move in with her. And then my mother broke off the friendship. And, you know, I mean, I was a kid. I didn't know what the fuck, right? Later, I thought about it. So I don't know if my mother just wasn't into that or if she was scared of it or what, but I always thought, at least later, that it would have been so much better for her and for me if she had had that relationship. Anyway, you came into the point where my mother is sick and about to die, all right? You can catch up later. So I brought her home from the hospital, and, you know, we were there for a while. One Sunday night, I went out folk dancing at Columbia, as I always did.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Love that reaction.
When we did this in the Cape, my friend Olga was there, who I actually knew from folk dancing in Columbia in the 60s. And when I came back, my mother was comatose. She wasn't dead, but she was comatose. And I didn't know whether she had done something or whether she was just sick. So I looked around for a note or anything like that, and I couldn't find anything, and I just really didn't know what to do. You know, if she had tried to kill herself, I didn't want to interfere. But if she didn't, oh God, shouldn't I see if she can be revived? And I agonized for a while. By this time, we had a phone in the house. So I ended up calling, and the ambulance came. And again, they took her to Lincoln Hospital, which was a little better run at this point. And after the doctor looked at her for a while, he came out and he said, "Is it possible she took something?" And I said, "Well, if she did, that was her choice and I don't want to interfere with it." He said, "What?" So I had to say it again. If that was her choice, that was her choice. I don't want to interfere with it. So he finally got it. They put her in an ambulance again to take her to the hip hospital. And by this time, I mean, I was pretty sure this was intentional. And I don't know, if there hadn't been somebody else in the back of the ambulance, I was tempted about, you know, putting my hand over her face. I don't know if I could have done it. But at that point, I was like really worried that she would wake up and think that I was a bad son, because I had, you know, kind of interfered with her final wishes. So by the next day, when they contacted me and told me she had died, I was actually relieved. So I had to clean out the apartment. I kept a few things. I think I have a chair here, but I gave everything else to the neighbors in the house, and they, you know, gave it out to friends or the church or whatever. Came back to Cambridge. Now, you're probably wondering what the hell this has to do with the first part of the story, right? All right, you're going to find out. You missed the first part. You're out of luck. I told Susan about my mother's death. And while I was telling her, it hit me. I said, "You know, you sound just like my mother's best friend, Jenny, when I was young." And I said, "Geez, you sound so much like her." I told you, from the South. "You sound so much like her, I would ask if you were related, if I knew her maiden name." And she said, "Well, what was Jenny's married name?" I said it was Jenny LePayton. She said, "Jenny LePayton was her mother's best friend too." turns out that they had grown up in a very small town in the mountains in North Carolina. Maybe, 300, 400, 500 people. Her mother and Jenny were the same age. They had grown up together. They had gone through high school together. And then they had both moved to Washington, D.C. Jenny had met LePayton and got married and moved to the Bronx. And Susan's mother had moved back to the little town and got married, and Susan had grown up there. So they had this particular accent, and it just amazed me that something in my brain was deep enough, to pick that up. And Jenny and her mother had lost track of each other 20 or so years ago. We got them back together. They were delighted. But why did this have this effect on me? And I decided to think about it. When I was in the age that Freudians think of as the Oedipal age, my mother was like 40 years old, very plain, definitely not sexually active. Jenny was young, beautiful. She was my mother's friend because her son Carl was my best friend. All right, and she had another baby, during the time that I knew her, and she was, So I think a lot of my feelings got attached to her. So, we don't know why these things happen to us, but in my case, it was not love at first sight. It was love at first listen. That's my story. Good enough for the moss.
That is good enough for the moss.
Can you tell about meeting your father, or that's so unpleasant that you don't want to talk about it?
It could be both, right?
I looked for him after my mother died because I realized that he was the only person who knew some stuff. And I won't tell you exactly how I located him, but it turned out he was living in Israel, in Haifa. And I arranged to go visit him. And he was a wacko. Anyway, it made me very glad that I hadn't grown up with him. But I did get a lot of information, largely because he would monologue. He didn't like anybody else talking. So I would listen as long as I could, and then I'd shut the door, write stuff down. And it was and that's all I'm going to say about that. Any other questions?
Yeah. Your mom was Catholic?
No. Called Lutheran, if anything.
Lutheran. Was a name like Maria?
Holmstrom.
Holmstrom, Swedish.
But you said her middle name was Maria.
Got me.
Well, I think people from Scandinavia often have, if
Yeah.
they're Christian, often have Mariah or Maria.
Yeah, I think.
So, where does your Jewish identity come from?
New York. That's actually not a bad question.
That's actually right.
That is a good answer.
No, it's not a bad question. Look, the neighborhood I grew up in, the South Bronx when I lived there was mostly Irish and Italian with a few other, no Jews. I got called kike a couple of times, and I tried to figure out why the hell. I realized afterwards is because, I used to go to the recreation center and go swimming, and I was probably the only circumcised kid there. But I did not have this accent, and my mother did not have this accent until I went to junior high school with Jews. And to me, I was assimilating into the middle class by getting this accent. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Many weird things.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, I just want to say, I've known you for a long time. I've heard various stories. Almost all of this I've never heard. And I'm so glad that you've done this and impressed that you were able to do this whole thing. And it's like inspiring me. Should I do something similar sometime? So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, I've never heard
Yeah.
it either.
Wow.
And Bonnie had never heard the part about my mother being sick when I was.
When he was 13. I never.
I don't talk about that.
Never heard it, yeah.
What else don't you talk about?
But Bob was going to say something about that. Yeah. What else don't I talk about? I don't know.
So what happened to Susan?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
We didn't, maintain a relationship or whatever.
And are you're quite sure that your mother actually took some pills or something?
Oh, I didn't say this, yes. When I went back home, there was an open, empty bottle of phenobarbital on the table, which I don't know how I hadn't seen. But what I want to say is, if any of you want to kill yourself, don't do it this way. If you do want to kill yourself, I have a lot of better ideas. And there's a very good book called Final Exit.
Oh God.
It tells you how to,
Name, yeah,
tells you how to do
Derek,
it.
Whatever. Yeah.
Don't tell me these things.
And how did you get the education thing if your mother was not educated and you clearly excelled in school, right? Where'd
Well,
that
she
come
was
from?
uneducated, but she was smart. My father was smart. Not that I didn't necessarily believe in genetics, but
Where did you do undergraduate?
Did you
Columbia?
go to science, David?
I went to Bronx Science.
That'll do it.
Yep.
Gateway School.
I was in the SPs,
Yeah.
Yeah,
if you know
right.
what that is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you why I didn't go. Well, I didn't go to Harvard because I needed to live at home. I had never heard of Columbia. I mean, the only college I'd ever heard of was, I'd heard of Harvard City. My guidance counselor at Bronx Science told me I could go to Harvard if I wanted. And the reason was I was the highest ranking non-Jew in the class.
Right, you were looking for non-Jews.
Yeah, they didn't take a lot of Jews.
Yeah.
They had a quota.
Yeah. Crazy.
Can I tell you something else about Harvard? I told you my mother lived, when I was born, my mother was living on Inman Street. She told me a number of times that she took me in a stroller down to Harvard Square. And she had the temerity to walk on the Harvard yard. And they kicked her out because she was a townie. So when I
County
went,
gown.
so when I, went to Harvard, as often as I could remember, I spit on the statue of John Harvard.
On his shoe?
Yeah, he's
Did you rub it in too?
Yeah, right.
I just spit on it. You notice the little class resentment?
What's that?
Yeah.
I actually thought that Margaret and Marla were going to be here. They said they might come.
Yeah,
And
right.
I don't know if you guys know Margaret and Marla. Some of you do.
Margaret Cerullo and
Yeah.
Marla, yeah. There's no-
They are, among other things, our Cuba connection. We went to Havana. And all right, since you seem to be tolerant here, I'm going to say something I was going to say for them about Cuba. I went to Cuba in 1972 on a student leaders trip. And, for whatever else you might say about Cuba, everybody knows not everything is perfect. The thing that affected me the most was that my mother, you know, when she worked for the city, she thought that was a civic responsibility. It was, you know, her job to do it well because she was a citizen and because, you know, that's what government should be. And, you know, she was treated like shit all her life. And I had the distinct feeling that in Cuba she would be the model citizen. You know, they'd elect her head of the CDR, or put up a statue to her little town. And, you know, for whatever else, that means a lot to me. And I gotta say something else that means a lot to me. Our other daughter, Louisa, is very sick. And we're going through conniptions getting her health coverage. She keeps getting thrown off Medicaid for, you know, not sending in a paper or something, you know. And again, in Cuba, people don't get treated like this. And Anna has been taking care of her and the kids, and it's not easy. Louisa is 12 years older than Anna and was like a second mom. And Anna's been like a second mom to her kids. So. Depressing enough, guys? Should we talk about politics?
More depressing.
Well, I want to just, although everybody doesn't have glasses, and I think at the last party somebody brought champagne and I didn't get it together, but I just want to, I want to give you a toast
Yes.
on
Yes.
your 75th birthday for, you know, and for the love of my life, and to have many more happy years together. So.
And I'm never going to do this again.
I've never
Many
seen
more.
that
Thank you all.
Yeah.
So you said we could bring things to say,
Yeah.
Yes.
and I brought a copy of a recent Trump speech that I thought yes.
Start drinking.
No, someone else was. Larry's going to the extra bits. I realized how old I was, David, when I figured out that we met 44 years ago.
So you're 45?
47.
Yeah, right.
I was pretty grown up by the time I met David. The conversation we had earlier was I told David I thought of all these memories that I couldn't share. And it turns out that neither of us could remember how many of my ex-wives he slept with. But that's us. One of my favorite things that I learned from David. David told me that there are only 7 people who live in Cambridge. Do you remember this? Oh, no. And all the rest is done with mirrors.
I think you made that up.
No, and that's why you keep running into people.
They're all the same people all the
And
time.
they all know David. I mean, I don't know if you've run into this, but everybody knows David. So,
At our last birthday, Bob told the story of how he and I met.
oh yes.
Yes.
So
I was in my underwear.
and I was probably naked.
Yeah, you were probably naked. No, I was with his daughter, not his wife.
That's right. He was with my daughter, who was 6 months old, which I thought was really inappropriate. So what had happened? We had Becky, my first wife, and I had just moved to Cambridge. We were living in a tenants union, a different building than David, but David was spending many nights with Kathy Winter, who lived just below us. And I had no knowledge of him yet. I had never met him. And Becky, Sarah, Becky and I.
The ice is getting thinner.
I want to tell you that Debbie stopped worrying about me calling her by my ex-wife's names when she realized that I called my ex-wives by her name. So it sort of balanced out. But Becky and I woke up hearing Jessie, our daughter of 6 months or so, crying, which she often would. And then she stopped in a very strange way, and I don't know quite what that means, but I decided that it was strange. And so I got up and I walked down the hall to where Jessie sat, which was in a crib in the living room. And there's this total stranger walking up and down in the living room with Jessie, calming her down. And that was David.
In his underwear.
In his underwear, and I don't think the fact that he was in his underwear ever impinged. There were stranger things, you know. The door wasn't locked, I guess.
No.
It's like you could- and so, but that was the world we lived in, right? David thought. I mean, we know that David is, but he felt it was perfectly reasonable to go.
Yeah, she
up.
was crying for really a long time.
So this is pre-Ferber. But we sort of had the Ferber thing, and we had just moved to Cambridge, and so we'd gotten Jessie sleeping through the night back in Palo Alto, where I was friends with Amy. And so you move to a new location, or the kid gets sick, you know, half dozen things happen, and all the sleeping through the night disappears. So we were sucking it up, and Jessie was just going to have to put herself back to sleep. I mean,
And David ruined everything.
Yeah.
but for the first time, David knows. So there he is, and he smiles and says, "Hi, I'm David."
And Bob says, I'll take her now.
And then he mutters, "I'm downstairs with Kathy," you know, and wanders back downstairs. But that's one of many stories that I think of. So he talks about the voice. You know our voice story, right? When I called you up. So I had the opportunity.
I don't know where this is going.
Alan Alda came to my
Oh,
library
right.
to film a segment of his Scientific American Frontiers about my research into sleep and memory. And I had never seen MASH. I mean, I hadn't had a television since 19... Oh, I'd never owned a television at that point. So since I left high school, I'd never watched television. I knew about MASH, but I didn't know Alan Alda from David. Well, so what's
So
strange is... so
the
this
background,
whole-
the background you need to know for this is that,
No, you don't need to know that.
all right,
That sounds interesting.
That comes later. That
All right,
comes
all right.
later because that's the denouement, if you want. So you have to understand. So they're supposed to meet me at the front doors to Mass Mental Health Center, where the stairs are littered with chronic schizophrenics, and this town car pulls up and 5 people get out, and you know there's the publicist, there's the photographer, there's the sound person, there's continuity, there's Alan Alda. I got no clue which one is Alan Alda, and I sort of realized at that point that I probably shouldn't have. And then he very graciously comes up and introduces himself. And he spends the night there in the lab, and the next morning I called David and I said, "David, I have to tell you, I just met Alan Alda, and he looks like you. He's got your accent. He's got your sense of humor. And he's got your syntax, whatever it is. I mean, if I didn't know it was Alan Alda, I would think it was you." And then David says,
well, there was a period in my life when I apparently looked a lot like Alan Alda, and it was during the MASH time. And I would get asked several times a day, "Did anybody ever tell you look like Alan Alda?" You know,
or they would say, "You're Alan Alda, aren't you?"
well, one time I tried to pass. And what you know, I developed a whole series of responses to this, but what I really felt was that he was such a likable character that I think even the people who didn't, you know, it didn't click that I looked like him, reacted to me much more positively than they would have, you know, I mean, if they actually knew me. But, no, I actually think that was true, that there was this period of time when people just, you know, when they looked at me, they liked me because I looked like Alan Holden.
So Alva and I had gone over to Jamaica Pond to film a little conversation between us, nice environment and all. And after we filmed this, we get up and we walk back to the van, and three people stop him to tell them how much they loved him and how much they loved MASH and what a wonderful actor, what a wonderful person.
Oh, I thought they were going to say, hi, David.
Didn't he ever tell you you look like
Who's that guy up there was Maurice Holmstrom?
Yeah, right.
So I asked him, I said, does this happen all the time? And he said yes, but he said that was really interesting is he said, it doesn't happen with movie stars. It happens with TV stars. Movie stars you see in a movie theater, and they're up there on the big screen. These people who stop me, they've eaten dinner with me every week for 3 or 5 years, and they think I'm a member of their family. And that's what you got. You got these introductions. You got this. You were part of their family, and it's a really strange phenomenon. So I wanted to tell you that story. We had all sorts of wonderful things.
Maybe we should be filming you.
We are.
Oh.
At one point, David and I co-bought a video camera. You remember that?
Yeah, yes, we gave it away last year only.
There you go. And recently I found old videotapes that had written on them Chile.
You're kidding.
Oh, cool! Oh, really?
So if you
Because
reach
we
back-
sent all our tapes to E-Memories and got DVDs.
That's what
Oh
we
my
got
God! You did it!
2 videos, 2 copies each.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's so exciting!
Holy shit.
Oh, wonderful! Oh, that's so cool! Oh, thank you!
What's on the videos
It's
exactly?
them in Chile.
Yes, we lived in Chile from 92 to 98. I think maybe everybody knows that. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And why
And-
I
and
have
we-
these tapes, you know, is
Well,
completely...
we would pass
Yeah,
the
we pass the
camera with
camera
its
back and
case
forth.
back and forth.
Right.
That's great.
Great.
My mom actually did that for me as a Christmas present. It was about 12 DVDs,
Yeah,
I
we
want
have-
to say, of just my entire childhood.
There you go.
Including, you know, a
Yeah.
whole lot of handheld, God, how old were they? 8-year-olds.
12?
No,
And-
8-year-olds, you know, all doing Spice Girl routines.
And you were good.
I was really good. I was really good. I knew every word. I knew every word. Every dance move.
You have to
I was
appreciate
really
this.
good. Trust me.
This was a real quality camera that we had bought
you.
each year.
I was
It was
good.
probably the equivalent of 400 DPI, you know,
Oh, God.
400 pixels wide or something. So it's not the finest quality. but
Well,
it's there.
I hope you edited out the footage we found, like of
The bathroom stuff, no, we left that
no
out.
the people's
the
feet
feet.
in the floor
Oh, yes.
when people didn't
There's a
know
lot of that on
didn't
mine,
know it
too.
was turned
There's-
on.
I became obsessed with that video camera, and my mom let me take it a lot, and the footage isn't that great. I'm not gonna.
You learned why it's called footage.
I literally footage. But you know, I loved it, and she tried, and she let me be me, and it was not good. But you know, that's funny. She actually
is
did that for me. Oh my
Her and
god.
her friends in Chile.
Right. I know. I've seen it many times. It's a great.
There was like this. There was like a kiosk at the mall where you could dress up and take old
Great.
school
Pictures,
pictures.
yes.
And actually, this was right before we were supposed to be at the airport. And I remember they were calling me, yelling at me because I was late. But I insisted that this was very important stuff that I was doing.
And it turns out that it was.
It was very important, but I remember getting yelled at a lot for that picture. Also, it was very expensive for no apparent reason, but good memories.
David, do you have a picture of your mother?
Yes.
Yeah, you
Is there
do.
a photograph
I've seen it.
floating
You do.
around here?
Yeah.
Anyone?
It's
Isn't it?
Some, I saw it recently.
Are
No.
those your albums? No, those are yours, not his.
There's
Somewhere.
I think that album is upstairs, but
really? I've seen
It's a big They're not out though.
No. But.
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
but.
not yet.
Oh, but. Oh, yeah.
Oh, baby photos.
Oh, yeah.
Embarrassing. Here she is. Yeah, I know. Okay, good.
I knew,
Oh, yeah, good,
I knew
okay,
there was
good,
one.
yeah.
I knew there was one around.
I knew there was one around too because
No,
I've
because
seen
we've
it.
done
Yeah.
this. There's one around, definitely.
Here.
I knew it. At least one.
What a sex plot.
Oh my God, I'm adorable.
Isn't that adorable?
So cute.
All right.
So I suspect I'm not the only person here with stories about David.
Well, wait. You're
You're not even the only one who's known him for 44
this picture is
years.
inspiring another story.
Oh.
When I was, what year was it? Must have been the year after my mother died. I turned 30. And I decided to drop acid on my 30th birthday.
Was the first time?
No.
Definitely not.
And
Definitely not the first time.
I'll skip that.
my original intent was,
Yeah.
all right. You know, I was born in Cambridge City Hospital in Cahill 4, which I understand was now the psych ward.
Yep. I was just
So I thought that if I dropped acid, I could get myself admitted to the place where I was born and try to relive. Luckily, I was too wiped out to even try that.
yes,
what
luckily.
But what I did do was I went through my family albums and I recognized all of the people who I hadn't known who they were before. I mean, it was really quite profound, including several of my mother that I hadn't known were my mother.
Just like Ellen Alda.
Wait, so when you dropped acid, you could remember, you could identify the people in your baby pictures?
It was not just babies, it was all the family album. It was all her brothers and various relatives. I hadn't known who they were, and you know,
You remembered.
The memory portal.
Yeah.
I like that. Remember that.
And then I had one of those universal experiences. Is this too hippie?
How could any...
Never too hippie.
I spent a long time.
So cute.
I know.
Jesus, what happened?
I love it.
Well, there goes your dinner.
David, put the acid in her dinner.
I don't think I need it. Sweetie.
So that's Ellen Alda?
You're so adorable.
Yeah, right.
Sweetie.
Well, I spent a long time on this, looking at myself in the mirror. No, I had one of these, you know, profound experiences where after a while I could see every face in the world in my face. And then after a while I could see every animal. And after a while I started seeing plants. I didn't get to rocks. But it was actually quite
Awesome.
awesome. Yeah.
Good
We are
stuff.
all one.
I don't have
Yeah,
a religious, huh?
Everything
We are
is
all
awesome.
one.
Yeah, right. I'm not religious, you know, but
Don't need to be.
yeah, right. That was nice.
And you could remember everything.
I remember the experience, you know.
Is that the
Nice
ring?
ring. That's a nice ring.
It's the angels.
So-
Sounds very
You guys can keep talking. I'm gonna start putting dinner on the
Yeah,
table.
the quiche is probably
fine, I
ready.
just checked
Yeah,
it.
I
It's
checked
okay.
it too.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Good.
Need help?
I did check it. I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
one or
yeah.
two
I know, I did the same thing. I was like, wait, is it burning? No.
That's what I thought. I
I'll
was like,
watch
we would have smelled it by now.
No.
We would have.
Sorry.
I did check the kitchen.
Okay, you can go to the bathroom now.
Oh, wait a minute, I wanted to say that 49 years ago.
Oh, wait a minute, guys. We could,
Yeah, Connie beats both of us.
No,
Uh
I've always been a one-upper, you know?
No, I don't mean to be. I was just contemplating that. So in 1970, David was my yoga teacher.
You taught yoga?
And picture walking, now here's a conflict.
Square.
Wow.
Picture walking into the basement of the church
Oh,
in Harvard
CCC.
Square at the,
Oh,
no, it's
Unitarian.
at the corner of Church and Mass Ave.
Yes.
First Baptist. First Church Cambridge.
The First Church Cambridge, which is now
The Y Youth Shelter.
the homeless shelter for the YWI youth, which was designed by Gail,
oh,
Look at
partner,
that.
all these years
We just
ago.
keep it in the family.
But 49 years ago, I used to go and be with hundreds of people, and John Loder was the yoga teacher in Harvard Square, who was my very first yoga mentor.
yeah, mine
But
too.
when John was gone, this handsome young man with a braid down to his middle of his back, with this lithe, flexible, amazing body, would get up and be my yoga teacher. So that's David.
Braid down what?
Not just a ponytail down to about here, right?
I don't think it was quite that long.
So I thought you might want to expand on that.
Stand on my head.
But isn't that amazing?
Yes, and we now go to the same yoga class.
We're the same
Full
yoga
cycle.
studio. Yeah, we're still in the same yoga studio. Pretty amazing, huh?
Can you do the grumpy octogenarian pose?
He does that very
I was
well.
just gonna say, that's probably his best one.
This is it. He's sitting there and he goes, I'm not going to get up and do this.
Yeah, and I knew Gail from a completely different.
That's right.
Yeah.
So in
political
1975,
stuff.
I'm glad to see Judy here because in 1975, when I got back from Wounded Knee, one of the very first people I met in Cambridge was David, and I decided that I was an undergraduate at Goddard College because they would give me a degree for doing political work and writing about it, which was very convenient. But David was organizing a group of graduate students at Cambridge Goddard to write a book about political organizing in Boston. So I said, oh, I'm an undergraduate in Goddard in Vermont. Can I join the group? I think I'm the only student who actually finished my sections to that, in which it turned out to be a perfect way to move into a city. I interviewed Marla Erlene and Leslie Kagan, Lisa Lakehorn, Betsy Warrior, who else? That was the section on the women's movement. The housing activists. So my two sections were on housing and the women's movement. And it was how I got introduced to a whole bunch of people who are still my friends. So it's a very convenient project.
And she interviewed you?
No, he was my teacher, ostensibly.
Oh, you're the supervisor. Oh, right. This is when Rochelle Rothschild was my teacher.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
It's good to remember how long the roots last.
Oh, that's funny.
I will say, I love that. I can just look around and see how many people I've known my entire life because they've known my dad for so long. And that's great. I've known known you guys.
I knew
my life.
Leslie because I was in the first Alzheimer's Brigade, and she was the person who organized it.
So she, when I came in 75, she was here and had been here for a few years, and she left somewhere in the 80s. I think she first moved to New York.
She went to New York for the
anti-nuke
march.
Anti-nuke march, the big million-person anti-nuke march. She moved back to New York to organize that, and then
And of course, I went to high school with Leslie's brother, so I knew her since she was 12.
I remember that
Well,
story.
Stephen?
Yeah.
Then I went to college with Stephen.
No, you
I'm
knew
telling you,
that.
the roots are very long and they're very
You knew that because we talked about this when he came and talked about Columbia.
That's right.
Right. And I went to junior high school with her ex-husband.
Oh, you know, I did this.
You see, there only are 8 people.
So the smoke and mirrors story is true.
Oh, it's absolutely.
like
Yeah,
that.
Yep.
There are 16 of us.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Wow.
Maybe there's 25 of us, but there's not very many.
Or, as my friend Felice says, the ruling class is a lot smaller than you think.
And more significantly, we are a lot bigger than we think.
So David, did you do science as an undergrad and undergrad?
Huh?
Now we're doing science. You've been at a science high school. in
Wrong
New York.
science, yeah.
But
Yeah.
But you, what did you major?
Marxism.
Social studies,
Right.
Was
right?
the poli sci?
It was
Big mistake.
60s.
You did social studies at Harvard, right?
I taught social studies at Harvard.
Because that's how you met Sarah, yes? Because she was a social studies major.
No, we were in the same class at some point.
Oh, okay.
Oh, geez, don't break the pictures.
Gotta be careful where I lean.
So I'm being inspired to tell an inappropriate story.
That's always the best.
Following up on Bob's
Bob.
story and the David naked with the baby. So
Underwear.
Underwear.
Yeah, I'm hearing he had
They were,
something
they were
on.
underwear.
the way I got to know David,
Just shut up.
was with wife number, Bob's wife number 2, whatever her name might have been. Right. And she was giving birth to her second child next door. We live in a 2-family house side by side with a door between them. So we too heard cries and sounds coming from next door. And every time I went over, David was there. He was, that's my memory. He was kind of the major support person. Maybe he was the second major, but every
I
time
was there.
I think we're digging deep now.
Man, I've heard
No,
this
well,
story my
even-
whole life.
Yeah.
Even before that,
With,
the first
Yeah.
baby, Bob and I caught the
I was
baby.
just gonna say, even with the first one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was one of
well,
the
we
high
did.
points in my life, Bob.
We didn't
On
know
the
you
first
guys
bounce,
then.
right?
No, before it hit the floor.
And then I wanted to just say something nice. It's not funny, right?
But don't strain yourself.
So it's kind of, so I'm a lawyer and have practice doing all different things with people with all different problems, including estates and things like that. So David would be one of the people I would call up with questions, send clients to sometimes for the tax, and he would say, I don't want that one anymore. But he uniformly picked up the phone. You know, you call other people with questions, they don't answer the phone or it's very fast. And we would talk for
And I wouldn't
quite
know
a
the
long
answer.
time. And he would mull over these complex problems and try to figure them out. And David was always the best to work with. It was a pleasure. And he's still at it. I'm not at it anymore. He's still
You mean
plugging away a little
I
bit.
can't consult with you on On a legal issue?
Feel free. Might be out of date, my information. A pleasure. And Alan Alda, and then I'll stop. I never saw MASH, but Alan Alda, apparently Steve has relationships with him too. He shows up at my family weddings and bar mitzvahs and things because he's related somehow. So I've only seen him in person. Funerals. Lately I've been seeing him at a lot of family funerals. I've only seen him in person. And you got it. That, not like the MASH. You're like, you two are like the real thing.
Yeah, I don't feel like I look like him that much anymore, but there was a period of time when we crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm told your operational ability in the surgery room is really good.
Or as good as all of
Yeah,
us.
Rez is
That's
pretty
all.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He can fake it with the best of them.
That's all you need, Bob. That's all you need. Fake it till you make it.
Amy,
I want to say something, even though I've never known David very well. But I've known, you were one of the first people I met when I moved to Boston in '89. And the first thing I thought, I don't think I ever told you this, is you look just like my grandfather.
'89?
And, I mean, your hair wasn't even white, I don't think, but I was like, he looks just like my Grandpa
Jewish?
Izzy.
Izzy.
Grandpa Izzy.
Izzy.
And what I'm just
Poor
realizing
guy.
hearing you talk is that that whole part of my family was from the Bronx. And so it's not just, I mean, you
the
probably
water.
actually lived that way. I mean, you do somewhat, but it's like the whole way that you talk and your kind of your body language and your, you know, that whole thing. So now I'm kind of realizing where that is.
And they were probably from the Ukraine too, which is where
They were.
my father's family was from.
Yeah.
and David, I remember you telling me that were you,
Oh, I didn't tell you what my name was.
What was your
you're
name?
not David Holmstrom?
No, I'm
my
David
God.
Julius Feigelman.
Oh, I did
Feigelman?
Feigelman.
A Feigelman.
Birth name.
That's what's
your
on my
father's-
birth
It's your
certificate.
father's name.
Wow.
Wow, Feigelman.
My mother just
Julius.
reverted to
Holmstrom.
Holmstrom.
If you had Trump's hair, you could be an Orange Julius.
And I've never gotten it legally changed.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do?
How do you do that?
What's your
How
passport?
does everyone
What's
figure it out?
what happens with Social Security then?
In your
Passport.
Everything that I have, my
Everything
social
is in
security is in the name
double.
Holmstrom.
Right.
No middle name.
I talked them into giving me a passport in the name Holmstrom.
But you have an affidavit from your mother.
That I'm Holmstrom, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm a Holmstrom.
She's
I'm the only Holmstrom because Louisa was a shepherd.
Oh.
It's 50-50.
Yeah, see?
Yeah.
And I was going to say, one kid got shepherd, one kid got Holmstrom.
That's another story.
I'll
I
take
thought-
it though. I think it fits though. I think I'm more like you, and I think Louisa's more like Mom. I think it worked out.
I thought if they were sisters, they should both have the same last name. Bonnie
Schwartz.
Spiegelman.
Yeah, Feigelman. Everyone gets Feigelman.
Bonnie thought that if I didn't want her to be Holmstrom, it meant I wasn't committed. Wrong.
I will say, I think it worked out. I do think Louisa's definitely more like Mom, and I think she's more a shepherd, and I think I'm very much like you in all the good and the bad. So I think Holmstrom fits.
Yeah, but
I'll take
people
it,
look
you
at you
know?
and they see your name as Holmstrom and they say, what?
Yeah, people. So being an Anna Holmstrom, people expect. If you Google it, there's a lot of Anna Holmstroms.
And
because
they don't
it's
look
Swiss,
like you,
but
do
it's
they?
a lot of A-N-N-A Holmstrom. I'm A-N-A, but a lot of people have told me in my life that is not what they expected me to look like. On social media, there's a lot of Anna Holmstroms again with the double N and the, everything. And I don't have Holmstrom as my last name on Facebook, so no one can ever find me. But they say that every time they look me up, there's just a bunch of blonde girls there, and no me. But I like it. I think it worked out. I think it was very appropriate that they split it the way that they did. Not that they knew that that's how it was gonna be, but I agree. I think I'm a lot more like my dad than my sister is, and my sister's a lot more like my mom than I am, but you know.
And those statements are both
I don't know if that's a
compliments.
good thing or a bad thing, but you know, this is how it turned out.
And you can be the unique on the homes.
I am. I'm the ANA on a Holmstrom, you know? No one else is that.
That's a good thing.
I like it that way.
So I said this to Bonnie in the other room, and she said I should say it to you, which I'll say here, which is, I feel really honored that you were willing to share that story with all of us. And your willingness to be that vulnerable without asking for any pathos or pity, but talking about it for real in a way of, this was my life, and I've lived through it, and here I am, and feeling proud in a certain way of those challenges and those struggles. So thank you. It was really a gift to all of us.
So you're welcome.
Well, I'll say something about that. I said this when we did this on the Cape. I really didn't know how to do this. And I don't know if you people know who Ira Wood is. Woody?
Yeah, Marge Pearson.
Yeah, he does a radio show on the Cape. And about a month ago, his guest was a woman who organizes the Cabaret Festival in Provincetown. And she talked about what it was to be a cabaret performer. And she said that the idea was not just to entertain people or to do a shtick, but to actually show yourself so that the audience knew you better. Didn't just, like have a performance. And that really helped me think about what I wanted to do. It kind of changed or gave me permission, I'm not sure which, but it was very helpful.
Do you now do the dancing part?
No, the stripping part.
The stripping part. Oh, underwear! We want the underwear!
David's getting ready for the crown.
Is there a doll we can reenact?
Or I could call Jessie, who's just over there. Maybe she could.
I will say though, speaking about gifts and everything, I think for me growing up like this, it's been great to see the friendships that my parents have. I mean, I've grown up with most of you in my life, always. I mean, I don't remember a time where you guys weren't there, and I think that for me, that has instilled a value in friendship and kind of trying to keep them for as long as possible. I have a best friend who I went to daycare with. Our sisters were friends.
Yeah, where the hell are they?
They're camping.
They're camping.
Oh.
With sisters, family. But, I think that every time parents have a gathering, birthdays, anything, the same faces show up. And I think it's great that every time there's stories of how long and how you guys have met and decades of friendship. And I think that that's a beautiful gift. And it makes things like this possible. You don't do stories like this with strangers. You do it with people that you know and you love and you trust and you've always been there with. And
Yeah,
I
most
think,
of you.
for the most part. And I think it's just a beautiful thing. It's a gift, and I think it's instilled something in my life and something that I strive for to have. And I try to keep my friendships for as long as possible
Well, you have
because of
the
that.
beauty of having the mistake of growing up thinking that this is normal.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Doesn't
No, I
everybody
completely
have
agree
a
with that.
little
And to me, you're right.
friends
This
from-
is normal to me. And
Yeah.
when people say it's not, I'm like, what do you mean?
Don't you?
This
Yeah.
is how life is supposed to be, isn't
It's
it?
normal
This
for
is,
some of us.
right.
Yeah.
And it
That's
is
the
my
gift to
normal.
you, yeah.
And I love that. And that's why when he said the word gift, that's the first thing I thought of. I was like, every single friendship in this room, no matter how old or new it is, it's deep. It's a good friendship. It's a beautiful friendship, and I love just seeing the same faces and new faces and everything around because my parents have made that an important thing, and I appreciate that. I think I've brought that into my own life, and I love that. Like I said, I've known most of you for my entire life. I'm 30 years old, and you guys have been around for that long and longer, you know, and I love that. I think that's beautiful.
Oh, that's lovely.
That was
It
really
is.
too.
It really is.
Thank you.
It really, really is.
Who's hungry?
The food is on the table and getting cold. So please, and we got a lot of it. So I want all of you to eat a lot because then. Happy birthday to you. I'll bring in the plates.
Are you
Hey, you gonna give a speech?
Are you
Have we heard you?
feeling-
Oh, you want a speech?
I want a speech. Yeah.
How lucky you got to be 75.
Over here, it looks like it says 57.
I knew you when you were 57. You looked like Alan Alda then.
Forks, spoons, whatever.
Oh,
for
my
the
hair
cake.
went white, you know, in my
There is more
early
forks downstairs.
50s. And I thought it was better to look like a, you know, healthy 60-year-old
I
than
think
a
it's in
decrepit
here.
45-year-old. I'm gonna need help blowing it out.
No, you're not.
No,
Yes.
you're not.
No, I am. I know I am because
Yeah.
when I did this on the Cape, I couldn't do it.
Oh my
So the
God.
secret is back away further and give it as a pop puff.
I
Watch.
mean, this is
Go
the
on.
second.
Let's do it together.
Help him out.
Okay.
Help me.
Help him out. Exactly.
1, 2, 3.